My mother-in-law kicked me out of her house because she disapproved of my decision to give birth at my parents' home. She forcibly removed me while I was still in my pajamas, not even allowing me to put on shoes. With only my phone in hand, I quickly called my mom, who was close by. I waited for her at a local diner. When my mom and sister learned about the incident, they were furious and immediately took actions that would soon spell trouble for my mother-in-law and my husband. My name is Emma, and I'm 29 years old. I married Jerry, who is 31, a year ago. His father owns a large company, and Jerry is being groomed to take over as the next CEO. He's currently getting experience at one of their smaller branches. I met Jerry at work, but I was unaware of his family's business empire until just before our wedding. He hadn't mentioned that he was in line to be the next CEO, which completely took me by surprise. He was so competent and well-liked that once he explained, everything seemed to fall into place, and suddenly I found myself as the wife of a future CEO. After we got married, Jerry relocated to the main company's office while I continued with my job. My father-in-law seemed supportive, telling me, "I've heard you're a young leader at your workplace. Keep up the good work." However, my mother-in-law viewed things differently, questioning, why would a wife neglect her home to work? She was strongly opposed to me having a job. Initially, I thought living separately from Jerry's parents would avoid any conflicts, but I was wrong. They expressed a desire for us to live together, and that's when our troubles began. When my father-in-law mentioned he was very busy and suggested it would be helpful to have someone around to take care of things, Jerry also liked the idea of us living together. "I'm worried about Mom, and I've always lived here. Moving now just wouldn't work for me," he explained. I found myself in a position where I couldn't say no when they discussed the arrangement. My mother-in-law chimed in, "Since everyone agrees it's a good idea, Emma, do you have any objections?" Feeling cornered, I reluctantly agreed to move in with my in-laws. Once we were all living under one roof, the challenges began. My mother-in-law, who had already expressed disapproval of my job, started to make my daily life quite difficult, insisting I quit my job and take on all the household chores, despite me working full-time. If she found any fault with my cleaning, such as a speck of dust or a stray hair, she demanded I redo it. Initially, I tried to use her criticisms constructively and more thoroughly. However, her scrutiny escalated to checking rarely cleaned spots, like behind the TV or between dressers, which I felt went beyond typical cleaning duties. Eventually, I stood up for myself. "I can't clean these areas every day. I work just like Jerry. I'll do a thorough clean on weekends, so there's no need to redo everything today, right?" My mother-in-law was infuriated by my response. "How dare you talk back to me like that?" she exclaimed. In her anger, she summoned Jerry, falsely accusing me of yelling at her and misrepresenting my suggestions as confrontational, complete with tears for effect. I hoped Jerry would see reason and stand up for me. "Mom, Emma is working too. Maybe you could be a bit more understanding?" I thought he might say. However, the reality was disappointing. "Why did you upset Mom like that? She was only trying to help," he said, siding with her. This response highlighted a stark difference in expectations and support within our family. "Why are you getting upset?" Jerry reprimanded me, ultimately siding with his mother. It was then I realized the only person in that household I might rely on was my father-in-law, but his frequent absences due to work left me to navigate the tension alone. I soon learned that challenging my mother-in-law only led to disputes that left me feeling deflated, as she would invariably complain to Jerry, who offered no support. Deciding it was best to avoid conflict, I adopted a quieter demeanor, which seemed the only way to maintain some semblance of peace. This strategy carried me through the year until I began experiencing health issues, prompting a visit to the doctor. The diagnosis wasn't just an illness, I was pregnant. Hopeful yet apprehensive about the family's reaction, I shared the news with Jerry first. "You know how I've been feeling unwell lately? Well, I went to the doctor and guess what? I'm pregnant, I revealed. That's great. So I'm going to be a dad, huh? Can't wait. Do we know the gender yet? Jerry responded excitedly. Not yet. Does it matter to you? I inquired, already sensing his underlying expectations. Of course it does. It has to be a boy, he declared. Jerry, being an only child, gave me the impression that having a son to continue the family business was crucial. What if it's a girl? I wondered aloud, concerned about how this might affect our family dynamics. Don't worry, I'm sure it's a boy, he reassured me, though I remained unconvinced. We decided to wait until the baby's gender was confirmed before telling his parents. When we discovered we were having a girl, I was overjoyed and uninterested in perpetuating any gender bias. Jerry's reaction, however, was less than enthusiastic. A girl? Are you sure? Get it checked again, he said, disappointment clear in his voice. His reaction left me anxious about how his mother would take the news. Despite his initial disappointment, I dreaded the conversation with my mother-in-law, wondering how we would navigate the challenges that lay ahead. Eventually, we knew we couldn't keep the pregnancy a secret from the in-laws any longer. I gently nudged Jerry to share the news. Well, I'm pregnant, he told them. My father-in-law's face lit up with joy. That's wonderful, Emma. We're finally going to have our first grandchild, he exclaimed with genuine happiness. However, my mother-in-law's reaction was immediate and pointed. So, what's the gender? She inquired. With a slight hesitation, I responded, It's a girl. A girl, huh? I hope she's as lovely as you, Emma, my father-in-law said warmly, clearly not concerned about the gender, but my mother-in-law's disappointment was palpable. A girl? Not a boy? It has to be a boy to make sense for Jerry, she muttered under her breath. I was taken aback by her reaction, but before the tension could escalate, my father-in-law stepped in. Honey, why would you say that? Whether it's a boy or a girl, they are still our grandchild. Can't you just be happy? He chided her gently. She seemed subdued after his reprimand, but I sensed her change in mood wouldn't last. True enough, as soon as my father-in-law left for work the next day, she confronted me. Just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you can slack off on the housework. You're not planning to quit your job, are you? If not, keep up with your chores. Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know. Hearing these words from another woman, particularly one who had been through pregnancy herself, was startling. It made me seriously consider whether staying here was the right choice for my child. My family's home is about a 4-hour train ride away. Since my dad passed away early, my mom and older sister have been living there together. Perhaps if I shared everything with them, they might welcome me to stay. I began to feel that giving birth at my in-laws' place might not be the safest or most supportive option, and I remembered that my family's home could offer a better, more caring environment. I decided to call my mom immediately. Mom, it's me, Emma. What's up? It's rare for you to call, she replied. What's going on? I'm pregnant, and I was thinking, could I come home to give birth? You're pregnant? You should have told us sooner. Congratulations, of course you can come home for the delivery, but have you talked this over with your in-laws yet? Not yet, I admitted. Make sure you discuss it properly with them. If they agree, then I see no issue at all, Mom advised, stressing the importance of clear communication for the well-being of my baby. Encouraged by my mom's support, I decided to discuss the plan with my husband. I'm thinking of going home for the birth, I mentioned casually. Oh, going home for the birth? I guess that's fine, he responded nonchalantly. My mom's here, so things should be okay around the house. His quick agreement surprised me, but anticipating potential resistance from my mother-in-law, I turned to my father-in-law. After some thought, I approached him. I think it might be best for everyone if I went home for the delivery. Would that be all right? He seemed surprised initially, but then reassured me. If that's what you want, Emma, then it's probably the best decision. I won't oppose it. Could you perhaps speak to your wife on my behalf? I asked timidly. I'll tell her, he promised, seemingly supportive of my decision. With his backing, I secured permission to go home for the delivery without any issues. However, on the morning I was scheduled to leave, I woke up to find my packed luggage missing. My heart sank as both my husband and father-in-law had already left for work, leaving me no choice but to confront my mother-in-law. "Do you know where my luggage is?" I hesitated to ask. "Oh, that luggage. I got rid of it," she snapped. "I don't need a daughter-in-law who causes so much trouble. Don't ever come back," she shouted aggressively. Stunned by her harsh dismissal, I realized that returning to my family was not only a preference but a necessity for my peace and safety. As she pushed me out the front door, I barely had time to react. I hadn't even slipped on my shoes. Clad in just my pajamas, with only my smartphone in hand, I heard the front door lock behind me with a definitive click. It was a clear signal from my mother-in-law. She wanted me out, and there was no mistaking her seriousness. The thought struck me hard. If I lingered, that door might never open for me again. With this realization, I began to walk away, but the peak of summer made the barefoot journey outside nearly unbearable. Seeking some relief, I found refuge in a nearby diner. There, using the only possession I had, my phone, I called my mom, who was incensed by the situation and promised to arrive within an hour. Fortunately, she wasn't far away. I spent that anxious hour in the diner waiting for her. When my mom arrived, she didn't hesitate. She drove me straight back to our family home where my sister was already waiting. I shared everything, the harsh actions of my mother-in-law and the apparent indifference of my husband. My mom and sister quietly exchanged words, their murmurs leaving me wondering about their conversation. The next morning, being back at my family home felt like a breath of fresh air. When I went to fetch the newspaper, I opened the door to an unexpected sight. My mother-in-law and husband were kneeling outside. "Emma, I'm so sorry. It was all my fault. Please don't sever ties with my husband's company," my mother-in-law pleaded. "Emma, I'm sorry too. Please, can we continue doing business with my dad's company?" my husband added, his voice filled with regret. Confused, I had no idea what they were talking about. Then, suddenly, my mom and sister appeared from behind. "What on earth are you two doing causing a scene this early?" my mom asked sternly, her voice cutting through the morning air. "What does resuming business mean?" she probed, wanting to understand their sudden change of heart. To avoid any further disturbance, my mom invited them inside. The atmosphere was tense, with unspoken questions hanging in the air as we all stepped back into the house. Once everyone was seated, my husband began to plead his case. "Would you please consider doing business again with my dad's company?" he asked. My mom and sister, who managed the company my late father had left behind, listened intently. Curious about the details, I turned to my mom. "What does it mean that they're doing business with my father-in-law's company?" "Yes, they work with one of their subsidiary companies," my mom explained. "It's a major company within their group, second only to the main office. And their top client is your mom's company," my husband added, looking at me. This was news to me, and apparently to my husband as well. I chuckled. "That's news to me too." Reflecting further, I remembered something. Come to think of it, I recall my parents-in-law mentioning they've always been indebted to each other when they first met, I said. But the warmth of nostalgia quickly cooled when my mom interjected with firm resolve. "I cannot continue doing business with a family that would send my daughter out in such a state with just her phone. I'm stopping our business dealings." My mother-in-law, visibly shaken by my mom's declaration, desperately pleaded, "Please, I beg you, I'll do anything. Could you reconsider stopping the dealings with my husband's company?" At that moment, my sister with a smirk chimed in. "You said you'd do anything, right? So you'll agree to Emma's divorce and naturally you'll pay alimony and child support, right?" Her words echoed in my mind. Just the day before, I had spoken to my husband about the situation. His response was dismissive. "It's what you deserve, isn't it?" This callous remark had only solidified my decision. Silently, I found myself agreeing with my mom's decision. Any remaining affection for my husband had evaporated. I would have brought up divorce anyway if my sister hadn't made the point so effectively. Thanks to my sister's well-timed comment, the dynamics of the conversation shifted decisively in our favor. My mother-in-law, though reluctant, finally asked, "Even if it means agreeing to a divorce, will you resume business with my husband's company?" With a knowing smirk, my mom pulled out her phone and made a call. "It seems this lady here agrees to my daughter's divorce," she spoke clearly into the phone. From the speaker, my father-in-law's voice came through. "Got it. Hey, Maria, I'm divorcing you, and Jerry, you're fired." Those were the drastic conditions he set for resuming business. Moreover, my mom declared firmly, "I cannot forgive the two of you for how you treated Emma. You both deserve to be punished." This unexpected turn of events led to my mother-in-law losing her husband and my husband losing his job, income, and the support of his family. The fallout continued with a bitter divorce between my in-laws, expertly managed by a top-notch lawyer from my father-in-law's side. During the proceedings, assets were divided, and my mother-in-law ended up paying a significant sum in compensation to my husband and me. I, too, proceeded with the divorce. Living with a husband who was so heavily influenced by his mother was no longer a viable option for me. I received compensation for the emotional pain inflicted by my mother-in-law and husband, as well as child support for our unborn child. The financial strain was so great on them that they had to dip into their savings and eventually take on debt. Under the powerful sway of my father-in-law and my mom, my now ex-husband found it challenging to secure a new job in his previous field and ultimately had to switch careers, moving into customer service. This marked a significant and perhaps humbling change in his professional life, underlining the profound consequences of the family turmoil. However, my ex-husband underestimated his new role in customer service and soon faced numerous complaints, leading to a swift termination. Now, he's living with his mother, barely scraping by with daily wage jobs. My mother-in-law and husband, once accustomed to a lavish lifestyle thanks to my father-in-law's generosity, now reside in a small one-bedroom apartment. Their relationship, once close, has soured, and they argue frequently. I sometimes wonder if there is any hope or joy left in their lives. Meanwhile, I safely gave birth at home to a healthy baby girl, surrounded by the support of my mom and sister. As things settle down, I'm planning to join my mom's company, looking forward to a new chapter in my professional life. I did inform my ex-husband about our daughter's birth, but he has not followed up, showing little interest. All I expect from him is to fulfill his obligations for child support. I have no intention of letting him be a part of our daughter's life. From now on, my focus is on moving forward and living a fulfilling life with my daughter, supported by the love and strength of my family.
"The plan worked," my husband exclaimed, gesturing around my late father's house. "It might be old, but it's spacious and well located. From now on, my parents and I will live here," he added. How could I have ever loved someone so selfish, I thought, watching Ryder's smug smile grow even wider. While I stood there in shock, he continued his insults. "This house of your father's is mine! Get out!" my husband demanded angrily. As his parents' belongings were moved in, I realized Ryder had no idea about the truth. Seeing his smug face, I couldn't suppress a laugh. My name is Maeve Honeywell, and I had been living with my father and my husband, Ryder. Since my mother passed in high school, my father raised me with endless love, and my affection for him never wavered. When I suggested Ryder and I move in due to his health, Ryder was all for it. "Are you sure?" my father asked, smiling but looking worried. He didn't want to be a burden. But when I shared my wish to stay close, and Ryder agreed, he finally accepted. As Ryder and I moved into my childhood home and unpacked, my father smiled gently and said, "This is what I've always wanted." I mentioned it was also more convenient for my work. He made us coffee, showing his usual warmth, which we appreciated during our break. Later, Ryder suggested, "If you want, you could quit your job to take care of your father full-time." Surprised, I asked, "What do you mean?" He explained that with fewer expenses, I could focus on my father. Though I liked the idea, I worried about relying on Ryder financially, so I decided to keep working, appreciating his support. A month later, Ryder brought it up again. Living with my father had lightened my chores, so I started to consider it more seriously. When I voiced my concerns about the financial impact, Ryder reassured me, saying, "Don't worry about that, I'll handle it." Eventually, I decided to leave my job to focus on my father. At first, he objected, wanting me to keep working, but he understood when I explained my desire to be there for him. However, things soon changed. "I'm home," Ryder would say, and I'd greet him warmly, but he grew distant. One evening, as I watched TV with my dad, Ryder snapped, "Can you keep it down?" "I'm eating." "Oh, sorry," I replied, surprised. His attitude toward me changed, yet he acted normal when my father was around. I worried quitting my job added stress, but all I could do was apologize. One night, Ryder came home late without answering my calls. Later, I got an email saying he was on a business trip. These trips became more frequent, and he stopped telling me his plans. When my father noticed, Ryder would just say, "No problem." "I'm working hard for our family," but his smile felt less genuine. Then, I received an abrupt email from my mother-in-law, asking for Ryder's work address without a greeting. My in-laws had always been cold toward me, so I was surprised and replied, asking why she needed it. She instantly called, furious. "You've made Ryder take care of your father while you sit at home. He's back at our house because of you. He forgot his lunch and I'm trying to bring it to him. What are you going to do about this?" Shocked, I realized Ryder had been staying with them during his business trips, and their words deeply unsettled me. Ryder told me it would be okay to quit my job, but I couldn't shake the feeling he had other intentions. Fighting back tears, I gave her his work address and ended the call. Trying to calm down, I made coffee in the living room where my father joined me. Smiling, I asked, "Would you like some coffee?" He looked at me, smiled, and said, "I'd love some." As we enjoyed our coffee, my father reminisced, "Your mom and I argued a lot when we were younger, but we always stayed honest. Couples who can argue and then make up grow stronger together." His words moved me, and I decided to have a serious talk with Ryder. "That's true, Dad. Thank you," I said, and he responded with a kind smile. I emailed Ryder, summarizing my conversation with his mother and saying I wanted to talk. "I'm busy. Don't make a big deal out of this," he replied dismissively, making me sigh. Frustration and anger bubbled up, but I took a deep breath to calm down. Since then, Ryder stopped contributing financially to our household, ignoring my messages about living expenses. My love for him faded, and thoughts of divorce started crossing my mind. Disappointed in his irresponsibility, I decided to delay discussing divorce, not wanting to worry my father. Until then, I'll rely on my own savings accumulated before our marriage. I was getting used to Ryder being gone, enjoying quiet days with my dad, until he suddenly collapsed. At the hospital, we found out he didn't have much time. Overcome, I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, smiling through my tears, telling him he'd get better. My dad looked sad but tried to smile. When I went home to grab my things, the loneliness of the house, filled with memories, was too much. I broke down in tears. During this difficult time, Ryder sent a cold message. "Since we're living separately, handle your own expenses. Maybe you can use your father's pension." Frustrated, I threw my phone, and my feelings for Ryder disappeared. Realizing it was pointless to dwell on him, I composed myself and prepared to go back to the hospital. Just then, I received good news in the mail that could change everything. Leaving the documents for later, I hurried to my father. My father's condition worsened, and I knew his time was running out. I spent those final days in the hospital, and each night I returned home in tears. He passed peacefully, and I was with him in his last moments. The grief was overwhelming, but his memory stayed deeply with me. With help from family, the funeral went smoothly, though Ryder and his family didn't attend. I hadn't told them directly, so I wasn't surprised. But days later, after settling the estate, Ryder showed up, bags in hand. "It's been a while. I heard your father passed away," he said. Seeing his face stirred anger in me, but I took a deep breath to stay calm. "What do you want?" "What's with the luggage?" I asked. Isn't that a bit harsh for a husband coming home? He replied with a smirk. Oh, and this luggage? My parents' stuff, of course. Hearing him refer to himself as husband was infuriating after he had abandoned me and stopped supporting the household. His words made no sense to me. Were you waiting for me? Jobless, struggling alone with expenses and looking after your father? Are you so happy you're speechless? He sneered. I looked at him in silence. No, seems I'm the one caught in your plan, Ryder added with sarcasm. His mention of a plan caught my attention, so I asked him to explain. His response was shocking. Living with an old man was something I couldn't accept. But if I'd asked for a divorce, I wouldn't have gotten this house. So I pretended to be the perfect husband, made you dependent, and ensured you'd be stuck with the elderly man. This house would then be mine, he concluded. Hearing this, I looked at Ryder in disbelief, feeling anger rise within me. Your story doesn't add up. You left and stopped paying the bills, I retorted. Ryder scratched his head, irritated. Yeah, I lost my patience, but I thought you'd never actually ask for a divorce. His smug smile made me wonder what I'd ever seen in him. I couldn't stand to see or hear him anymore. The plan worked, he continued. This house might be old, but it's spacious and well located. Starting today, my parents and I will live here. Could anyone be more self-centered? As I stood there in shock, he continued with more insults. This house of your father's is mine. Get out. Watching his parents' belongings being moved in, I realized Ryder was completely unaware of the truth. Seeing him so smug, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, which confused him. Are you crazy? He snapped. That word describes you perfectly, I replied, laughing as I prepared to reveal the truth. Didn't you know this is my house? It could never be yours. Ryder froze, stunned as I continued. Besides, we're no longer related. Didn't your mother tell you? Ryder, shocked, immediately called someone, likely his mother. What, Mom? Maeve is saying something strange. We're not divorced, right? I overheard him say, panic in his voice. Listening to his frantic call, I saw that he finally understood the situation. After he hung up, Ryder's face twisted in confusion. Did you really file for divorce? He asked. Yes, I replied, smiling. The day my father went to the hospital, your mother sent me the completed form, which I gladly submitted. She has her moments, doesn't she? I added. Damn it, Ryder muttered. It wasn't meant to be filed, that was just in case, not for real, he lamented. But you filled it out, didn't you? Intentions aside, I completed the divorce as you wanted. You should thank me, I said calmly, feeling relieved. His mother's harassment had ironically become the chance I needed to get the divorce I'd wanted. Later, Ryder anxiously asked, Who will get the house? I dismissed his concerns, explaining that since we'd lived together briefly and my father still held the assets at the time of our divorce, there was nothing to divide. But what about the savings? My ex-husband pressed, looking desperate. Even the savings you had before marriage should be split. Your claim has no basis, I replied calmly. He turned pale, tried to argue but could only stammer. Though tempted to mock him, I kept my composure. Let's end this here, I said firmly. Bringing your belongings into someone else's home uninvited is trespassing. If you stay any longer, I'll have to call the police. At this, Ryder quickly gathered his things and left. I sprinkled salt at the entrance, prayed by my parents' portraits, and said, This is for the best. I'll grow stronger. Please watch over me. Thinking of my parents reunited in heaven brought me comfort. Determined to start fresh, I searched for a job. With a friend's recommendation, I quickly secured a position that suited my skills. A few days later, Ryder messaged, Sorry for being stubborn. I wanted to start over. That's why I came to the house. I found it absurd, considered replying, but ignored him. Still, Ryder kept sending poetic messages like a persistent suitor. I'd share each poetic message with my coworkers, hoping for inspiration in my work as an illustrator for a cartoon editorial. Look, the melodramatic stalker is back, I joked. Ryder had become a source of amusement, but his messages only made me uncomfortable, so I kept ignoring them. One day, the doorbell rang. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Ryder. Surprised he'd come in person, I immediately called the police. I know you're in there. I see your car. Please, just listen. I'm really in trouble, he pleaded. My parents sold their house Because we thought we'd move in here. I have nowhere else to go. Help me. I felt no sympathy. Their assumption this house was theirs only showed their entitlement. The police convinced Ryder to leave, but he resisted until they escorted him away. After I ignored his Romeo emails, my in-laws began reaching out, first calling, then emailing when I didn't respond. How can you ignore our situation and not reach out? We were family once. Isn't it cruel to be so indifferent? You made us lose our home and now we're stuck in a rundown apartment. Why not give us the house? You must have inherited it from your father. You're not struggling financially, and we quit our jobs. Take responsibility, and they pleaded. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. How could they be so oblivious to others? At first, I tried to ignore them, but eventually, I blocked Ryder and his family. Changing my contact info felt drastic, but blocking wasn't enough. One day my ex-in-laws showed up at my door, voices loud. Come out! You know we're struggling. Let's get back together. How can you ignore someone in need? What kind of person does that? They knocked persistently, but I didn't hesitate to call the police. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Peeking through the peephole, I saw an unfamiliar man confronting my former in-laws. Go home, he said sharply. You're bothering people. My former in-laws looked puzzled by the man's unexpected appearance. What did you say? Who are you? Are you her new lover? They shot back. Unfazed, the man looked at them coldly. Your behavior is the problem. Look around. This is a residential area. People are gathering because of you. You're causing a disturbance, he retorted. Through the peephole, I saw neighbors gathering, which was embarrassing, but watching my ex-family flustered was oddly satisfying. When the police arrived, one officer recognized Ryder and said, It's you guys again. My ex-in-laws turned red with embarrassment. How much trouble will you keep causing? Get a grip, officer added. I thanked him as he left, feeling relieved as I watched my ex-in-laws being escorted away and the neighbors dispersing. Hours later, the doorbell rang again. I looked through the peephole and saw the same man. Hesitating, I opened the door cautiously. With a warm smile, he said, It's been a while. You should have told me you were back. I recognized him but couldn't quite place him until he added, Don't tell me you've forgotten. It's been over 10 years. Remember me? I'm Frank. Hearing his name brought back a flood of memories. Frankie, now I remember, I exclaimed, smiling. Frank, my childhood friend from next door. We hadn't seen each other since we changed schools. Finally remembered, huh? Frank laughed. I moved back here so we're neighbors again. It's been so long and I wanted to thank you for earlier. It really meant a lot to me. Thanks again, I said. Frank just laughed, making me smile. We reminisced and I shared some recent struggles. He promised to be there for me, proving he was still a reliable friend. When I mentioned my father's passing, Frank offered to pay his respects, remembering him from our childhood. Having someone who shared my past was a real comfort. A few days later, I got an unexpected letter from a law firm. Shocked, I read I was being accused of infidelity and asked to pay damages. Then I saw an email from an unknown address titled, Regarding the notification. Your ex-husband Ryder has filed a lawsuit for marital infidelity. Admitting it now will avoid escalation. We plan to notify your workplace. To protect your future, we recommend resolving this soon. It was a thinly veiled threat, likely from my former in-laws, not a real lawyer. I suspected the document was fake, so I consulted a real lawyer who confirmed it. The supposed attorney wasn't even registered. Playing along, I replied that I'd consider their claims if they provided proof of my alleged infidelity. They responded, Ryder endured immense emotional distress, and we seek compensation for that, but still offered no real proof. It seemed unlikely any real professionals were involved. There was no infidelity, hence no proof exists, I replied. It's hard to believe a professional would act on such unfounded claims. Don't you agree? They replied emotionally, We're moved by Ryder's passion and want to help him. We expect your sincere cooperation and don't wish to escalate this further. Quite emotional for a professional, I replied coolly. Impersonating a lawyer is illegal, you know. Just to confirm, you do hold legitimate qualifications? After that, their responses stopped. Finally, I got another message. I'm a professional, but your arguments were unbeatable. We're withdrawing the lawsuit." "There's no need to withdraw," I replied. "I'm calm about being falsely accused, and am ready to defend myself legally. Looking forward to meeting this passionate lawyer in court." All communication ceased after that. However, the silence didn't last long, as my former in-laws appeared at my door late one night, loudly begging for forgiveness. "We made a mistake. Please spare us from the lawsuit." Awakened and furious, I shouted, "Stop disturbing me." Never having seen me so angry, they were taken aback. Grabbing my father's wooden sword nearby, I firmly warned, "Come any closer and I won't overlook it." My former mother-in-law and Ryder looked terrified, whispering, "We're so sorry. If you were really sorry, you'd have changed your ways. Don't ever show up here again," I added sternly, noticing the flashing lights of a police car. Apparently the neighbors had called the police, who promptly took my former in-laws away. My former mother-in-law tried to say, "She tried to attack us with a wooden sword," but the police dismissed her claim after I explained that I only grabbed it for self-defense due to their late-night disturbance. Frank, who had been nearby, testified that my former in-laws had harassed me repeatedly, and the police concluded that their actions were malicious. Finally, peace was restored. Following Frank's advice, I reported the incident, and with his testimony, the process was smooth. He even joked, saying my voice was terrifying that night. Soon after, a restraining order was issued, and my former in-laws never bothered me again. Someone had recorded the late-night commotion, and it ended up online, making them the talk of the neighborhood. It's uncertain how they're living now, but they're likely relying on the retirement funds of my ex-in-laws. As for Frank and me, we grew closer over the next few months, and eventually, he confessed his feelings, and we started dating. Frank always brings a smile to my face, and the time we spend together is truly joyful. It feels like this happy turn of events is a gift from my father, filling me with gratitude.